The mansion stood at the edge of the city like a fortress of wealth, towering gates, endless gardens, fountains whispering against the night air. To outsiders, it looked like the picture of perfection. Marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, golden chandeliers that rained light upon the halls, and servants who moved silently, as if choreographed by some invisible conductor. But perfection is often the best disguise for secrets. Inside that mansion lived Jonathan Sterling, a millionaire businessman admired for his success. His empire stretched across hotels, shipping companies, and international investments. To the world, he was a man of influence, a model of power and control. But those who had worked close to him knew his house was not a home. It was a theater where masks were worn and truths were buried. Jonathan had one daughter, Isabella Sterling. She was the jewel of the mansion, a young woman of grace, beauty, and intelligence. She had grown up surrounded by wealth, but unlike many who lived in luxury, Isabella carried a softness in her heart. She treated workers with kindness. She remembered their names, and she often slipped out of her grand room to spend time in the kitchen, laughing with the staff. And among all the workers in the mansion, there was one who held a very special bond with her. Nanny Grace. Grace wasn't just a nanny. She was the soul of the house. A tall, dignified black woman with eyes that had seen both hardship and hope. She carried herself with quiet strength. She had raised Isabella since birth, rocking her to sleep when her mother passed away, teaching her not just manners, but also compassion. To Isabella, Grace was more than a nanny. She was family, protector, and guide. But Grace also carried a secret. She had always felt that something inside this mansion was wrong. The Sterling mansion was filled with whispers. Not always. Words, but movements, glances, shadows that flickered too quickly. Servants avoided certain rooms. Doors were locked at odd hours. And in recent weeks, Grace had begun to notice subtle, disturbing changes. The butler whispering angrily with a supplier in the dead of night. Strange bottles arriving in shipments that didn't match the kitchen orders. A new maid who seemed far too curious about Isabella's routine. Grace's instincts had never failed her, and her instincts now screamed. Something dangerous was brewing. One evening, Isabella came down the marble staircase dressed in a flowing silver gown. Her father was hosting one of his grand evenings, lavish parties where politicians, businessmen, and high society elites gathered to drink, laugh, and secure deals behind the glitter of champagne glasses. "Nanny Grace," Isabella whispered as she adjusted her necklace. "Do you ever feel like everyone who comes here isn't really here for us? They smile, but it feels like something else." Grace gave her a knowing smile. "Child, when money builds a house, the walls will always echo with ambition. You must be careful who you let close to your heart." Isabella nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She loved people. She trusted easily. And in that trust, she carried her innocence. As the evening wore on, the mansion lit up with music, laughter, and crystal clinks. Jonathan Sterling welcomed guests with a proud smile. But behind that smile, he scanned the room constantly. As if searching for both allies and enemies, Grace stayed in the background, watching carefully. Her years as a nanny had trained her eyes not just to see children's mischief, but the hidden intentions in adults. She noticed how the new maid lingered near the drink trays, how the butler kept his hand over one particular glass, how a sharp-eyed man in a tailored suit slipped into the kitchen when no one was looking. Something was not right. Later that night, after the guests had left and silence wrapped around the mansion again, Grace sat by Isabella's bedside. Isabella had dozed off, her breathing soft, her face peaceful. Grace tucked the blanket tighter and whispered a prayer under her breath, Dot. But as she stood, she noticed a faint smell, a metallic tang in the air, coming from the pitcher of juice left on. The bedside table, Dot, her brows furrowed. Grace leaned in, sniffing carefully. She had worked in households her whole life. She knew the scent of fruits, wines, herbs. But this carried something sharp, something unnatural, Dot. Her heart thumped. Dot, she didn't touch it. She didn't move it. Instead, she stepped back and whispered to herself, Lord, give me the strength. Something wicked has entered this home. From that night onward, Grace became vigilant. Every glass, every tray, every dish that came near Isabella. She watched it like a hawk. She trusted no one, not even the butler who had served the family. For years, Dot, because she had seen too much in life to dismiss her instincts. And she knew, when poison walks into a home, it rarely comes from a stranger. It comes from someone within Dot. But Isabella was unaware. To her, life was still a mix of books, art, and stolen moments of laughter with Grace in the kitchen. One afternoon, she teased Grace for being overly protective. Oh, Nanny, you're acting like I'm still a little girl, Isabella laughed, sipping tea. You watch me as though I might break. Grace's voice was firm but tender. Child, glass is fragile because it shines. Don't confuse my caution with fear. I watch you because I love you, and love always protects. Those words would echo louder than Isabella could ever imagine in the days to come. Dot, meanwhile, far away in the darker corners of the mansion, someone else was watching too. A shadow moved behind closed doors, whispering into a phone. Yes. The plan will go through at the party. The drink must reach her. No mistakes this time. The line crackled. The shadow listened, then gave a short nod. It will be done. She'll never see it coming. The Sterling mansion, with its shining chandeliers and polished floors, had never been more dangerous. And as the day of the great dinner approached, Nanny Grace felt the air itself grow heavy, like a storm gathering above a calm sea. Dot, she didn't know when. She didn't know how. Dot. But she knew something terrible was about to happen. Dot. And she would have to be ready. Dot. The mansion had never looked so alive. Dot, golden chandeliers dripped light across the grand ballroom. Tables glittered with silverware and crystal. Glasses. Musicians tuned their violins in the corner, ready to fill the air with elegance. The smell of roasted delicacies drifted through the hallways. Dot. It was the kind of night where power met performance, where the rich flaunted their wealth, and smiles hid schemes. Jonathan Sterling had spared no expense. Tonight's dinner wasn't just about celebration, it was about influence. Rumors had spread that foreign investors would be attending. Politicians, businessmen, and elites from across the city were arriving in sleek cars, stepping out in gowns and tuxedos, greeted by red carpets and camera flashes. To everyone, this was just another glamorous Sterling event. But for Grace, it was a battlefield. She watched every servant like a soldier watching an enemy line. She noticed the nervous movements of the kitchen staff. She saw how the butler carried the drinks with more caution than usual. And she especially watched the new maid, the one whose eyes darted constantly toward Isabella. Grace's instincts screamed louder than ever. She didn't know when, but she knew tonight was the night. Isabella, radiant in a gown of sapphire blue, moved gracefully through the room. Guests adored her, complimenting her beauty, her kindness, her charm. She smiled politely, but every now and then she turned to search for Grace as if needing her silent reassurance. And Grace, always nearby, nodded firmly, reminding her, I am here. You are safe. Then, the drinks came out. Trays of sparkling juice and champagne floated through. The room carried by servants. Laughter grew louder, deals whispered in corners. Music swelled in the air. Jonathan Sterling raised his glass high, making a speech about legacy, loyalty, and the future. But Grace's eyes locked on one glass dot. She didn't know why, but something about the way it had been handled, set down, lifted, moved again, set her instincts ablaze. Her throat tightened. She stepped closer, weaving through the crowd, her heart pounding. Dot. And then Isabella reached for it. Dot. It happened so quickly. Dot. One moment, Isabella was laughing with a group of guests, the sparkling glass in her hand. She raised it gracefully, took a sip, and set it down. Dot. The next moment, her face paled, her body trembled. The glass slipped from her fingers, crashing to the marble floor. Dot. Gasps filled the ballroom. The music screeched to a stop. Guests turned, horrified, as Isabella clutched her stomach, stumbling backward. "Isabella!" her father cried, rushing forward. Dot. But before anyone could reach her, her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the cold marble, her gown spreading around her like a fallen star. Dot. The room erupted into chaos. Grace's voice thundered through the mansion, sharp and desperate. "Stop! Don't touch her! The juice is poisoned!" The words cut through the noise like a blade. The guests froze, eyes wide, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Poisoned?" Jonathan stared in shock. "What did you say?" Grace pushed through the circle of guests, kneeling beside Isabella, her hands trembling as she checked her pulse. Isabella's skin was clammy, her breath shallow. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was firm, commanding. "She's been poisoned. That glass. Don't let anyone touch it." Servants hesitated. Guests exchanged fearful glances. Some stepped back, others gasped in horror. The shattered glass glistened on the floor, its liquid spreading like a dark secret across the marble. "Call the doctor!" Jonathan barked. "Now!" But Grace shook her head fiercely. "There's no time. I've seen this before." She looked around the room, her eyes blazing. "This wasn't an accident. Someone in this house wants her dead." Her words struck the guests like lightning. The atmosphere shifted. Laughter turned to fear. Trust dissolved into suspicion. Eyes darted to the servants, the guests, even Jonathan himself. Isabella's body shook, her lips turning pale. Grace lifted her gently, whispering, "Stay with me, child. Stay with me. You are stronger than this." As the mansion spiraled into chaos, one thought burned in Grace's mind. The enemy is not outside. They are here. In this room. But who? The butler, who suddenly avoided her eyes. The new maid, who had quietly slipped into the shadows? Or perhaps someone far closer than anyone dared to imagine. Grace's heart pounded as she held Isabella tighter, her voice trembling in both fury and prayer. "Lord, protect this child. And give me the strength to uncover the truth before it's too late." The music was gone. The laughter was gone. All that remained was the chilling echo of Grace's warning. "The juice is poisoned." And with those words, the Sterling mansion was no longer a place of celebration. It had become a crime scene. The mansion was in chaos. Guests whispered in terror. Some demanded to leave, others pressed Jonathan for answers. The glittering night had shattered into a nightmare. The fainted daughter of a millionaire, poisoned juice on the floor, and the chilling voice of a black nanny cutting through the air. It was the kind of scandal high society thrived on, but tonight no one dared speak too loud. Because danger was still inside those walls. Jonathan clutched his daughter's limp hand. "Isabella, stay with me. Someone get the doctor." But Grace's steady voice rose above his panic. "There is no time for doctors. We need antidotes now," the chef stammered. Antidotes? I don't..." Grace's eyes sharpened. "Charcoal, milk, honey, bring them to me quick." The servants scrambled. Guests looked on, wide-eyed, as Grace tilted Isabella. gently, forcing a few spoonfuls of honey into her mouth, whispering prayers with every breath. "Come on, child. You will not die tonight. Not while I have breath in me." Slowly, Isabella's trembling eased. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, hazy, weak, but alive. Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dot. The crowd sighed with relief, but fear still clung to the air. Jonathan stood, his face red with rage. "Who did this? Who?" His booming voice shook the chandeliers. "My daughter's life was almost stolen tonight. Someone will answer." But Grace, calm and unshaken, looked at him steadily. "The question, sir, is not just who, but why." Her words silenced the room. Every guest turned, their eyes flicking between servants and family members. Suspicion spread like wildfire. The police were called. Investigators swarmed the mansion, sealing the ballroom, questioning everyone. The glass shards were collected. The untouched drinks were taken for testing. But Grace already knew. This wasn't random. She had noticed too many little things in recent weeks. Strange shipments, unfamiliar faces, the maid who watched too closely. She had spent her life protecting children, and she could feel danger like others felt cold wind. And tonight confirmed it. Someone wanted Isabella dead. Hours later, after the guests were dismissed and silence returned to the mansion, Jonathan sat in his study with trembling hands. Papers lay scattered across his desk. He had built empires, crushed competitors, faced lawsuits, but nothing had terrified him like almost losing his daughter. Grace entered quietly. Jonathan looked up, his voice hoarse. "Tell me, Grace, how did you know? How did you see what none of us did?" Grace closed the door behind her. "Because, sir, I've seen poison before." Jonathan froze. "Before? What do you mean?" Grace sighed deeply, her eyes clouding with memory. "Years ago, I worked for another family. They were wealthy, like yours. They trusted the wrong people. Their little boy was poisoned at his own birthday party. By the time anyone realized, it was too late. I was the one who held him as he died in my arms. I swore that day I would never ignore the signs again." Her voice hardened. "So when I smelled that picture by Isabella's bed weeks ago, I knew something was wrong. And tonight, when I saw that glass, I knew." Jonathan stared at her, shaken. "You saved her life," he whispered. But Grace wasn't finished. "And I'll keep saving her until we find the devil hiding in this mansion." The following days were filled with tension. The mansion, once alive with servants' chatter, now felt like a prison. Everyone eyed each other with suspicion. The butler avoided Grace's stare. The maid fidgeted nervously. Even Jonathan's business partners visited less, whispering about scandal. But Grace stayed close to Isabella, never leaving her side. Isabella, still recovering, clutched Grace's hand. "Why would anyone want to hurt me, Nanny?" she asked. In a trembling voice, Grace stroked her hair gently. "Because light draws both love and envy. Some people cannot stand to see you shine." Then came the breakthrough. One night, while checking the kitchen, Grace noticed a small vial hidden behind jars of spices. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The label was scratched off, but the smell was unmistakable. Poison. She turned quickly, only to find the new maid standing in the doorway, frozen, her face pale. Grace's voice was steel. "This is yours, isn't it?" the maid stammered, shaking her head. No, I don't know how that got there." Grace stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me, child. I have eyes sharper than knives. Who are you working for?" The maid's lips trembled. She broke into tears, collapsing to the floor. "Please! I had no choice. They threatened me." Grace knelt, gripping her shoulders. "Who? Speak the truth." The maid whispered one name, and it was like thunder in Grace's ears. She carried the truth to Jonathan immediately. Dot. When she revealed the name, Jonathan's face turned ashen. He staggered back, gripping his desk for support. No, he muttered. It can't be them. But Grace's voice was firm. It is. And if you don't confront it now, Isabella will never be safe. The truth? The poison wasn't from strangers. It wasn't from rivals outside the mansion, Dot. It was orchestrated. By someone within Jonathan's own circle, Dot, someone who smiled at his table. Someone he trusted. Dot, the next dinner in the mansion would no longer be about power, business, or prestige. Dot, it would be about exposing the traitor hiding in plain sight, Dot, and Grace knew. This time, there would be no second chances, Dot. The Sterling mansion prepared once again for a gathering, Dot. But this time, the air was different. Dot, no glittering laughter. No careless joy, Dot. This was not a night of celebration. Dot. This was a night of reckoning. Dot, Jonathan. Sterling had invited only a handful of people. His most trusted circle of partners, servants, and family friends. But behind the polished chandeliers and shining silver trays, there was tension so thick it could choke a man. Grace moved silently through the room, her sharp eyes on every detail. Isabella, though still weak, sat beside her father. She insisted on attending, her fragile voice steady. If someone in this house wants me dead, I want to see their face when the truth comes out. Her courage made Grace's chest tighten with pride. The dinner began. Plates clinked. Words floated lightly across the table. Yet under the surface, suspicion burned like hidden fire. And then Jonathan stood. His glass trembled slightly in his hand. Friends, he began, his voice low but clear. Tonight is not about business. Tonight is about betrayal. Every face froze. Jonathan turned his eyes toward the end of the table, his jaw clenched. Someone in this house tried to kill my daughter. And tonight, that person will be unmasked. Gasps spread. The butler shifted uncomfortably. The maid lowered her head. Business partners exchanged nervous glances. Grace stepped forward, holding up the vial she had found in the kitchen. Her voice rang through the hall like a bell. This poison was hidden inside the mansion, and it was placed here by orders of someone who wanted Isabella gone. The guests erupted in whispers. Jonathan slammed his fist on the table. Enough! Grace, say the name. Grace's gaze swept across the table. Finally, her eyes locked on one man. It was Victor Lang, Jonathan's oldest business partner. He sat frozen, his face tightening, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Grace's voice was calm but sharp as a blade. It was you, Victor. The maid. Confessed. You paid her. You threatened her family to make her obey. You thought no one would notice. But I noticed. And tonight, the mask falls. A silence heavier than stone fell across the room. Victor's hands shook. He laughed bitterly, but his eyes burned with hatred. You think you've won, Jonathan? You stole everything from me. Every deal, every contract, every chance I had. You crushed me, while you stood high on your throne. And your daughter? She was just the final nail. Her inheritance would have secured your empire forever. But I won't bow to you. He reached for his coat pocket. But Grace was faster. She stepped forward, slamming her hand against the table. Not tonight, Victor! You will not harm this child again! Her voice thundered so powerfully that even the guards froze for a moment. But when Victor pulled out a small vial, the guards pounced, pinning him to the ground. The vial rolled across the floor, shattering harmlessly against the marble. Victor's screams echoed through the hall as he was dragged away. You'll regret this, all of you! But Grace stood tall, her shoulders straight, her eyes blazing. No, Victor, you will regret selling your soul to envy, because tonight, good has won. The room exhaled in relief. Isabella clutched her father's arm, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan pulled her close, whispering, You're safe now. You're safe. But as the guests dispersed, shaken yet grateful, Jonathan turned to Grace. He dropped his proud businessman's mask. His voice broke. "Grace, I built an empire, but all my money, all my power couldn't save my daughter tonight. Only you did." Grace shook her head gently. "No, sir, it wasn't me. It was love." Love is stronger than poison, stronger than envy, stronger than greed. That's what saved her. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, the man known for power bowed his head. Not to investors, not to politicians, but to the woman who had stood by his daughter like a guardian angel. Days passed. Peace returned to the mansion, though scars remained. Isabella recovered slowly, her smile returning like sunlight after a storm. She often told Grace, "You didn't just save my life. You showed me what courage really looks like." Grace would smile softly. "Courage, child, is just love wearing armor." And so the story of poison in the mansion did not end in tragedy, but in truth. A truth that whispered a lesson for every ear willing to listen. No matter how big the house, how heavy the crown, or how high the bank account, without love, everything crumbles. Envy destroys, greed poisons, but love protects and truth redeems. So if you're listening right now, remember this. Life will place you in rooms filled with masks. Some will smile at you while plotting your fall. But do not let fear consume you. Walk with love. Stay alert. Trust your instincts. Because sometimes one strong voice, like that of Nanny Grace, can expose the poison, protect the innocent, and remind the world that good still wins. If this touched your heart, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more.